The noise of the launch party was deafening. Confetti in our brand colors fell from the ceiling, catching the light from a dozen camera flashes. I stood on a small stage, holding a glass of champagne. I hadn't tasted. The investor on my right was clapping me on the back, his voice booming over the din. Unicorn. I am telling you, kid, a bona fide unicorn. That word, it echoed in the room, in the press releases, in my own head. Wed. Just closed our Series C. The valuation was a number so large it had stopped feeling real. It was just a score, a metric of pure, unadulterated victory. My face ached from smiling. Everyone wanted a piece of the founder, the wunderkind, who'd cracked the code. It was intoxicating, it was a drug. And like any drug, it blinded you to the cracks forming in the foundation. Company, I didn't know who I was just a guy who had failed very publicly. The shift in power was gradual, then sudden. My business started to turn a real profit. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could pay a leaner without sweating. I was no longer dependent on the outcome of the lawsuit for my survival. That changed everything. My confidence grew. In a deposition, David's lawyers tried the same old tactics, trying to paint me as incompetent, entitled. But I was different. I had receipts. I had a profitable company. I was no longer the powerless little sibling pleading for what was rightfully mine. I was a business owner fighting a competitor who had cheated. The final reckoning came on the eve of the trial, the pressure of the case, the discovery process that revealed his web of lies. It all collapsed on him. His own lawyers advised him to settle. He had no choice. We didn't just settle, we won. The agreement gave me back my 50% of the company plus damages for the lost profits. But more importantly, it forced a public statement. The betrayal was exposed to the entire industry, to the rest of our family. The illusion of the successful, respectable David was shattered. I stood on the steps of the courthouse, the papers in my hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. The fight was over. I had my inheritance back. But the funny thing was, it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like closing a chapter. I now possess the wealth I was originally owed. The company shares the money. But I look at the numbers in my foundation business account, and that's what I feel proud of. That's the fortune I value. The reclaimed wealth is just a monument to a battle won. The business I built is a living, breathing thing that I created. It's my fortress. The silence from David and that side of the family is absolute. Their laughter has been replaced by the consequences. I heard he had to step down from the company board. I don't take pleasure in it. It's just a fact, a result of choices he made. I've redefined what family means. My family now is a leaner, my fierce lawyer, who became a friend. It's my first employee at Foundation, a young architect who believed in the vision. It's the network of suppliers and clients who supported me. These are the people who stood by me when my own blood tried to break me. This is the family I chose. The lesson is the only thing I carry from that entire ordeal. True security doesn't come from an inheritance, from something given to you that can be taken away by a signature on a piece of paper, by the deceit of someone you trust. Real security, the unshakable kind, comes from what you can build with your own hands, your own mind, your own resilience. It comes from knowing that no matter what is taken from you, you have the ability to create something new, to build your own foundation from the ground up. And that is something no one can ever steal. The financial reality was a brutal daily humiliation. I sold my car. I sold the expensive watch I'd bought after the Series B. I moved out of the apartment and back into my old room at my parents' house. At 34 years old, the shame of that was a different kind of ache. I had to face debt collectors. I had to explain to my family what had happened. I tried applying for jobs, CTO positions, even senior developer roles. The interviews would go well until they connected my name to the news. The roar of the stadium was a physical thing, a wall of sound that hit you right in the chest. 60,000 voices, all screaming for one outcome, for one moment. The championship was right there within our grasp. I could feel the confetti ready to fall. The whole season, every drop of sweat, every ache, it all came down to this last play. The clock was frozen at 3 seconds. We were down by 2. The huddle broke, and I took my place. This was it. This was the moment I'd dreamed of since I was a kid, throwing a ball against the garage door. The ball was in my hands. The play was simple: get the shot off. It was a clean look. I'd made this shot 1,000 times in an empty gym. 1,000,000 times. It was muscle memory. I rose up, the defender a blur in my periphery. The release felt good. It felt pure. For a split second, hanging in the air, I thought it was in. I could already see it swishing through the net. But it didn't swish, it hit the back of the rim, with a sound that was somehow louder than the crowd. A dull hollow thud. It bounced once, twice. And then just fell away. Time didn't just stop, it shattered. The buzzer sounded. And for a heartbeat there was absolute silence, a vacuum of sound. And then the other sound started. It began as a low groan. A collective disbelief that quickly curdled into something else, something angry. It wasn't just from the opposing fans, it was from our fans, the people wearing our colors. The boos started in one section and spread like a virus, until the entire arena was raining down on me. I stood there at the free throw line right where I'd missed, frozen. I could see the faces contorted in disappointment, in rage. I saw a kid, couldn't have been more than 10, in my jersey, crying, while his father pointed a furious finger in my direction. The cameras were on me, a close-up on the jumbotron. A monument. Failure for everyone to see. I was the statue of their disappointment. The walk to the locker room was the longest walk of my life. A tunnel of noise and flashing lights, reporters, shouting questions. I couldn't even process what happened. Do you think you choked? Is this the end for you? Inside it was worse. The silence from my teammates was a heavier burden than the boos. Nobody knew what to say. What do you say to the guy who just lost everything for you? And then the real circus started the next day. My face was everywhere, not in a good way. They had a new nickname for me on the sports shows, the choker. My miss was played on a loop, set to dramatic music, dissected by every talking head in the country. They showed graphs of my declining performance. They interviewed experts who said my career was effectively over, that I didn't have the mental fortitude for the big stage. I became a meme, a gif of my face, right after the miss. That look of stunned horror was everywhere online, with captions like, "When you realize you left the oven on." The laughter wasn't kind. It was vicious. It was the sound of the world writing you off. I didn't leave my apartment for a week. I just sat there in the dark watching that play over and over again. My agent called, the team's GM called. I didn't answer. What was there to say? They had given me the ball, and I had dropped it, literally and figuratively. The contract talks that were heating up before the game, they went ice cold. The endorsement deals vanished. I was toxic. I was a punchline. Stories I'd see the recognition dawn in their eyes, the slight shift in their posture. The polite we've decided to go in another direction. Emails always followed. The physical part was easy to diagnose, a slight mechanical flaw in my follow-through. I could fix that, but the mental part, that was a different kind of injury, a tear in your confidence, that doesn't show up on an MRI. Every time I picked up a ball after that, I'd see that rim, I'd hear that thud, I'd feel that silence before the boos. It was like a ghost haunting my every move. The doubt was a voice in my head, a constant whisper. You can't do it, y'all fail again. They're all waiting for you to fail again. I had to get away. I went back to my hometown, to the old community college gym, where I first learned to play. No cameras, no fans, just me, a rack of balls, and the echoing squeak of my sneakers on the dusty floor. My old high school coach, Coach Miller. He heard I was back. He didn't call, he just showed up one morning with a key to the gym, and a quiet, figured you could use a rebounder. He became my anchor. We didn't talk about the miss, not at first. We just worked. We broke my game down to the fundamentals: footwork, balance, the simple joy of the ball leaving your fingertips. He forced me to shoot, until my arms felt like lead, until the motion was so ingrained I didn't have to think about it. And slowly we started talking about the other part, the part between the ears. He called it the clutter, the noise from the outside, the memory of the failure, the fear of the next one. He taught me to acknowledge the thought, okay, there's the fear, and then to let it pass by like a cloud, to focus on the next breath, the next dribble, the next shot, nothing else. I had to reinvent not just my shot, but my entire relationship with the game. I was never going to be the flashy high flyer again. That guy was gone. I had to become smarter, more efficient. I studied film for hours, learning angles, studying defenses. I worked on parts of my game I'd neglected, me passing, my defense. I built a new player from the ground up, piece by piece. A stronger, more resilient version. The work was lonely, it was grueling. There were days I wanted to quit, to just walk away from it all. But Coach Miller was always there, quietly pushing, believing, when I had no belief left in myself. The comeback wasn't a storybook moment. I signed a 1-year minimum contract with my old team. But it was basically a tryout. I was the last guy on the bench. The media barely noticed. The fans who did see me in pregame warm-ups just shrugged. I was a ghost, a reminder of a bad memory. They wanted to forget my job was to be a practice player, to help the starters get better. I embraced it. I brought energy every single day. I didn't care about scoring, I cared about making the right pass, getting Stop on defense being a good teammate, I earned minutes not with spectacular plays, but with quiet consistency. I earned back the trust of my coaches and my teammates one possession at a time, one game at a time. It was a slow burn, a midseason game, where I hit a couple of important threes, a defensive play that secured a close win. The narrative started to shift slowly from whatever happened to that guy to hey, he's actually contributing. There was no fanfare, just a gradual respect. I wasn't the star anymore, I was a role player. And I was okay with that, more than okay. I found a different kind of joy in the game, a purity I'd lost somewhere on the way to fame. And then somehow, improbably, our team fought its way back. We clawed our way into the playoffs. We won a tough series, then another. And we found ourselves back in the conference finals, one step away from the championship. The same stage, the same overwhelming noise, the same pressure. The lowest point was a specific Tuesday. I was in a coffee shop, using their Wi-Fi to apply for a job. I was wildly overqualified, for I was down to my last $50. My phone buzzed. It was an automated text from the bank, a final notice before an account was closed. And right next to me, two young developers were talking excitedly about their new startup, their voices full of that same naive hope. Once, had I felt a surge of something bitter and acidic, I wanted to stand up and warn them. The game was a war back and forth, neither team giving an inch, and with 10 seconds left on the clock we were down by one. A timeout was called. As we huddled up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The ghost was there, the memory of the booze, the mist, the hollow thud. But it was just a memory, it didn't control me. The play was drawn up, it wasn't for me. I was a decoy meant to set a screen and draw the defense away. We broke the huddle. The inbound pass came in, our point guard was trapped, the play was breaking down, the seconds were ticking away. 5-4. He was in trouble, double-teamed in the corner, he couldn't get a shot off. And then he saw me. I had flared out to the wing, a secondary option we'd practiced, but never really expected to use. The pass was a laser, it hit my hands with 3 seconds left. I caught it, I was behind the three-point line, the defender closed out on me, flying at me, his hand reaching for my face. And in that moment, there was no noise, no crowd, no fear, there was just the rim and the ball in my hands. And a lifetime of work. I didn't think. I rose up. I trusted the thousands of shots in that empty gym. I trusted the new form, the rebuilt confidence. The release was clean. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. The ball arced high into the air, the buzzer sounded, and this time it swished nothing but net. The eruption was deafening. The same stadium that had booed me into oblivion was now a cauldron of pure joy. Teammates mobbed me, lifting me off my feet. Confetti started to fall. But amidst all the chaos, I felt quiet, a deep, profound satisfaction. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about silencing the critics. It was about the journey. It was about proving something to the one person who needed to see it, me. As I stood there watching the celebration unfold around me, I finally understood the failure wasn't who I was. It was just something that happened to me, a single event in a long story. The missed shot didn't define me. The decision to get back up, to keep working, to rebuild myself piece by piece, that was what defined me. The comeback, the fight through the doubt. And the pain will always be a greater part of my story than the setback. The fall makes the rise mean something, and standing there a champion at last, I knew that. Every single painful step of the long road back was worth it. The view from my corner office was pretty spectacular, 23rd floor, looking out over the city. I remember thinking, this is it. I've made it. For 15 years I built a reputation as the go-to copywriter for luxury brands. My words sold million-dollar watches, exclusive real estate perfumes that promised a different life. It wasn't just a job, it was an art. I knew the rhythm of a perfect sentence, the subtle power of the right adjective. My skills were my castle, and I was the king of the hill. The first whispers were easy to ignore. A client would forward an email, some new marketing tool their intern found. Can we get something like this? But faster, they'd send over a block of text, generated by some early AI, clunky and soulless. I'd read it and laugh. It was like a robot trying to describe a sunset. It used all the right words, vibrant, breathtaking, majestic, but there was no feeling behind it, no human experience. I'd dismiss it, tell them, sure, I can give you the fast version, but let me give you the real thing. And I'd craft a piece of copy that didn't just describe a product, it told a story. They always paid the invoice. I was sure my craft was untouchable. I wanted to tell them it was all a trap, but I just sat there frozen. And in that moment, something broke. The self-pity, the feeling of being a victim, it just shattered. It was replaced by a cold, clear thought. This is the data This is the reality of the situation. You can sit here and feel sorry for yourself, or you can analyze the failure and learn from it. I wasn't a victim of bad luck, I was the architect of my own disaster. And if I built the failure, I could build the recovery. The goal wasn't to get. Then came the call from Aston Brooks, my biggest client for 5 years. I'd written all their campaign materials. The marketing director, Sarah, sounded almost apologetic. We're making a shift in our strategy. She said we're moving to a fully AI-driven content pipeline. The cost savings are significant, and the turnaround is instantaneous. I remember the floor feeling like it dropped away. I tried to argue to explain the value of a human touch of brand voice consistency. She cut me off. The decision's been made. The system is already in place. We appreciate all your work. Just like that, a 5-year relationship ended in a 3-minute phone call within a month. The other clients followed. They didn't even call, just emails. Were restructuring, pursuing more efficient solutions. My calendar, once packed for months in advance, was a blank white desert. The collapse wasn't gradual, it was a cliff, and I fell straight off. The silence in my apartment was deafening. No keyboard clicks, no phone ringing, just me. I'd spent my whole adult life defining myself by my work. I was the writer, the creative. Now what was I? I updated my portfolio, reached out to old contacts. The responses were polite, but the message was clear. The market had changed. I saw the articles online, the tech influencers celebrating the disruption. They called people like me legacy creatives, obsolete, a bottleneck in the new machine of progress. The comments sections were full of people laughing. Why pay a writer thousands when AI can do it for $10? Time for the artists to get real jobs. It felt like a personal insult, a dismissal of my entire life's work. I fell into a deep despair. I stopped writing altogether. What was the point if a machine could mimic it? Then was any of it ever truly valuable? I questioned everything. The value of art, of human expression. It felt like the world had decided it didn't need us anymore. I hit a real low point. I was looking at job listings for things I hadn't done since I was a teenager, and then out of sheer frustration, I started playing with the very tools that had replaced me. I signed up for every AI writing platform I could find. At first it was just to prove how bad they were, but something shifted. Instead of fighting it, I started to really learn it. I spent weeks inputting my old briefs, seeing what the AI would spit out, and I began to see a pattern. The AI was incredibly fast, and on a technical level its grammar was perfect, but it had no soul. It couldn't understand nuance, it couldn't grasp the subtle, unspoken desire a customer might have. It couldn't tell a story that felt true. That was the moment everything changed. The flaw wasn't in the AI's ability to write. The flaw was that it had no strategy, it had no heart. It was a brilliant, lightning-fast executor, but a terrible commander. The real value, the irreplaceable part, was the human mind guiding it, the creative director, the strategist, the emotional intelligence. I realized I hadn't been replaced by a writer. I'd been replaced by a very, very fast intern who needed constant direction. So I built a new service. I called it Strategic Narrative. The pitch was simple. I wasn't just a writer anymore, I was a creative director who used an iPod toolset. I offered a premium human-AI collaboration service. Clients would get the speed and efficiency of AI, but with the strategic oversight, emotional depth, and brand wisdom of a seasoned professional. I would guide the AI, refine its output, inject the humanity. I would do the thinking and the machine would do the typing. My first client was a small ethical fashion brand that was struggling to keep up with content demands. They'd tried using AI themselves, but the results were generic. I sat down with the founder for 2 hours. We didn't talk about keywords, we talked about her story. Why she started the company, the farmers she sources her cotton from, the feeling she wanted a customer to have when they wore her clothes. I went home, fed those core ideas into the AI, and then I got to work. The AI gave me 10 serviceable paragraphs about sustainable fashion. I took those paragraphs and rewrote them. I found the one interesting sentence and built a story around it. I added a touch of wit, a moment of genuine emotion. The result was a blog post that was produced in 2 hours instead of 2 days, but it read like it was written by a human who truly cared. Because it was, the founder was thrilled. She said it was the best content they'd ever had. Back to $1 billion valuation. The goal was to build something that wouldn't collapse. The goal was to prove to myself that I had learned. Word started to spread. I attracted forward-thinking businesses, the ones who saw that the future wasn't about choosing between human and machine, but about combining them. They weren't looking for the cheapest option, they were looking for the most effective one. And this new model was more effective than anything it'd ever done, before I was producing higher quality work faster. And with more strategic impact, the AI handled the brute force work, the first drafts, the research summarization, that freed me up to do the real creative work, the big ideas, the nuanced edits, the emotional connection. The business grew. I started hiring. I sought out other displaced creatives, a brilliant graphic designer who felt obsolete, a video editor who was struggling. I taught them my model: don't fight the tool, learn its language, use it to handle the tedious parts, so you can focus on the parts that require a soul. We became a small agency of human conductors, each of us leading our own AI orchestra. The work we produced was innovative in a way that pure human effort or pure AI generation could never achieve. It had the speed and scale of technology, but the heart and wisdom of humanity. The same people who had written those articles celebrating my obsolescence now started to take notice. I was invited to speak on panels about the future of creative work. The narrative flipped. I was no longer a victim of disruption. I was a pioneer, a leader of a new renaissance. The laughter had been replaced by a quiet respect. And the core of it all is so simple yet so profound. The fear we feel about technology is natural. But the answer isn't to hide from it, or to rage against it. That's a fight you'll lose. The answer is to integrate it, to see it for what it is: an incredibly powerful tool. It can automate the tasks, but it can't replicate the vision. It can mimic a style, but it can't originate a feeling. My value was never just in my ability to string words together. That was just the mechanics. My real value was my taste, my judgment, my empathy. The AI didn't make those things obsolete. It made them more valuable than ever because it freed them from the constraints of time and grunt work. The future doesn't belong to the machines, and it doesn't belong to the humans who refuse to adapt. It belongs to those of us brave enough to partner with the machine, to enhance our own uniquely human talents, and to build something new and better from the pieces of the old world. I remember the town the way it was, the way it's supposed to be in your mind. When you think of a place like that, Main Street, on a Friday evening, the shop awnings casting long shadows, the smell of coffee from Dinah's and burgers from the grill at Lou's. You could walk from one end of town to the other and know every face, every story. My hardware store was right in the middle of it. Anderson's Hardware, fourth generation. The floorboards were worn smooth by my grandfather's boots, and the bell on the door had rung for every birthday, every graduation, every little emergency. A town like ours could have. We weren't just a place on a map. We were a family, a living, breathing thing. The warnings started on a Tuesday, just lines on a weather map at first, then a name: Hurricane Lydia. They said it was turning, they said it might hit you. Prepare you, board up windows, you hope. But hope feels very small when the sky turns that color, a sickly greenish gray. The air gets still and heavy, and the birds just vanish. The silence before the storm is the loudest sound you'll ever hear. I decided to rebuild, not for revenge, not to show up the people who laughed. That energy is fleeting and toxic. I did it for me, to prove that the failure wasn't the end of the story. I had one simple idea, not a world-changing viral app, just a tool, a small useful piece of software that solved a very specific, very boring problem for a niche industry, something that could generate revenue from day one. No hype, no grand mission statements, just code and customers. Then the wind came. It didn't start as a roar, it was a moan, a low whistle at first, like something tuning up. Then it found its voice. It was a sound that wanted to tear the world apart. You could feel the house shaking, a deep vibration, right down to your bones. The rain wasn't rain anymore, it was a solid wall of water hitting the windows like 1,000 fists. And then the power went, the world went black. And all you had was the noise, the cracking of trees, the shattering of glass, a terrible grinding sound as something big gave way. You just huddle there holding on to whoever's with you, praying that the walls hold, and you realize in that absolute darkness how fragile it all is. Everything we built, everything we were, it can all be taken away in a few hours. When the sun came up, the silence was even worse. The wind was gone. But what was left, it wasn't our town anymore. It was a skeleton, a ghost. Houses were just piles of splintered wood. The old oak tree in the town square, the one we'd gathered under for 100 years, was ripped right out of the ground. Main Street looked like a war zone. Roofs were torn off, cars were flipped over, and everywhere you looked there was just mud, a thick brown sludge covering everything, and the smell: wet rot and gas and something else. Something metallic and sad. We stumbled out into the light, all of us in a daze. We were just shadows moving through the ruins, checking on neighbors, a lot of crying, a lot of hugging people, feeling their hearts beat against you, just grateful they were alive. But we lost people too. Old Mr. Higgins, who refused to leave his house on the river, the Miller family. Their mobile home just gone. The loss was a physical weight. It sat on your chest and made it hard to breathe. Then the officials came. They arrived in clean trucks with satellite phones. They walked around with clipboards, their faces grim and professional. They said all the right words. But their eyes were already writing our obituary. I was standing in what was left of my hardware store. The front wall was gone, and I was just looking at the shelves, everything covered in filth. One of them, a woman with a very serious expression, put a hand on my shoulder. She said they were sorry for our loss. She said the initial assessment was dire, that the structural damage was catastrophic, that the economic base was obliterated. She used words like unviable and relocation. She said it might be more practical, more humane, to help everyone resettle elsewhere, to let nature have this place back. I remember just staring at her clean boots in the mud, and something in me just snapped. It wasn't anger, not really, it was colder than that. It was a certainty. I looked past her at Mrs. Gable, sorting through the wreckage of her bakery, at Tom and his sons trying to pull a tree off their porch. These weren't people to be relocated. This was their home, this was my home. I climbed onto the pile of bricks that used to be our town's welcome sign. My voice felt raw, but it carried. I called out to everyone within earshot. I said, they think we're finished, they think this is the end of our story. People stopped what they were doing and looked up. Their faces were streaked with dirt and tears. They are wrong, I said. This is our home. Our grandparents built this town with their hands. Our parents raised us here. Our children took their first steps on these streets. We are not leaving, we are going to rebuild, not just the buildings, we are going to rebuild us. I started from my parents' garage, the same place I'd started my first company. But this time it felt different. There was no fanfare, no press releases, just me, my laptop, and a cheap desk. I went back to basics. I was the developer again. I wrote every line of code. For the first version, I chose a stable, boring tech stack. I built for security and scalability from the very first commit. I prioritized a clean paying codebase over flashy features. The silence of the garage was a gift. There were. That was the spark. It was a tiny thing in all that devastation. But you could see it catch a nod here, a straightened back. There Tom wiped his face with his sleeve and said, where do we start, Ed? The challenges were astronomical. The first few weeks were just survival, getting clean water, setting up tents. The bureaucracy was a nightmare. Insurance adjusters argued over every nail, government forms in triplicate. It felt like we were fighting two battles, one against the destruction and another against a system that seemed designed to make us quit. The sheer physical labor was overwhelming, clearing the debris piece by piece. Your body ached in places you didn't know could ache. But then came the small victories. I'll never forget the day we cleared Elm Street. It was the first street we got completely clear from one end to the other. It was just a strip of cracked asphalt, but it felt like a boulevard. We had a little barbecue right there in the middle of the road. Or the day we got the community center patched up enough to have a roof. We held a town meeting there. And for the first time since the storm, we weren't standing in the rain. We got the generator going at the Clinic 1 block, got power back, and you could hear the cheer from the other side of town. These little lights in the darkness, they kept us going. After a few months, once the initial shock wore off, we started to think bigger. We realized we had a blank slate, a terrible, heartbreaking blank slate. But a chance to do things right. We didn't just want to put everything back where it was. We wanted to build something better, something that could withstand the next storm. We held meetings, real planning sessions. We drew up new blueprints on big sheets of paper. We decided to bury all the power lines, no more poles to fall in a storm. We redesigned the drainage system so it wouldn't flood. We set aside more land for parks, for green spaces where kids could play. We made a pact to support local businesses, first to build an economy that was rooted here, not in some big chain store. It became a shared project. Everyone had something to contribute. Martha, who's 80 years old, couldn't lift lumber, but she organized the food. She made sure every volunteer site had coffee and sandwiches. The teenagers, they were the ones who were best with the technology, setting up our communication network. The carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers, they became the generals of this new army. We weren't just rebuilding houses. We were rebuilding trust. We were weaving the community back together tighter than ever before. The work was slow. It took years of fundraising, of grant applications, of backbreaking labor. We documented it all, photos of the first foundation being poured, videos of the framing, going up on the new school. We'd look at those pictures from the early days, the utter devastation. And then look at what we were doing. And it gave us strength. And then life started to return. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was a slow bloom. A new family moved into one of the rebuilt houses on Maple Avenue. They'd heard about what we were doing and wanted to be a part of it. Dinah reopened her cafe in a new, brighter building. The sound of her coffee grinder was like a symphony. And one day I was walking down the street, and I heard it, the sound of children laughing, just a game of tag in a new park. I had to stop for a minute. I leaned against a lamppost and just listened. That sound, more than anything, meant we had won. No investors to impress, no board meetings to prepare for it. Was just the work, the pure, unadulterated work of building. The town today, it's not the same as it was. It's better, it's stronger, the buildings are newer, the streets are wider, the parks are greener. But the soul is the same. It's the same stubborn, generous, resilient spirit. People call me a leader, they say I rallied the town. But that's not how it feels. I was just the first voice. The credit belongs to every single person who picked up a hammer, who made a casserole, who refused to give up. This town was rebuilt by thousands of hands, by a shared will. Last week we had the annual Fall Festival, the first one in the new town square. There was music and food and dancing. I stood on the steps of the new library and looked out at everyone. I saw Tom, who's now the head of the town council. I saw Mrs. Gable, her bakery, bustling. I saw kids, who were just babies during the storm, now running around with sparklers. The lights were strung up between the new lampposts, and they glittered against the night sky. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a testament. Monument to the simple, powerful idea that a community is not its buildings, it's the people, it's the love, and the grit, and the shared memory that binds them together. And when you have that, when you truly have that, you can face any storm, you can rebuild anything, you can build a future. For years, I thought I had it all. The corner office on the 40th floor, the view that stretched out over the entire city. I could watch the sun set behind the skyscrapers, painting the glass and steel in hues of orange and gold. My home was a monument to that success, a mansion with more rooms than we could ever use, a kitchen with appliances that cost more than some people's cars. Everything was polished, pristine, a perfect display. And it was all empty. It was a gilded cage, but I was the only one who couldn't see the bars. The anxiety was a constant hum, a low-grade electrical current running under my skin. Every decision was $1 million decision. Every quarter was a fight to prove my worth all over again. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, my mind racing through spreadsheets and projections, while my family slept in their separate wings of the house. I was a custodian of an image, a brand. The person I was supposed to be had completely overshadowed person I actually was. I was running on a treadmill, faster and faster, but I was never allowed to get off. The money was real, but the life it bought felt like a very convincing replica. End came not with a bang, but with a single sterile email, a corporate merger. My position was being made redundant, effective immediately. I read those words sitting in my $1,000 ergonomic chair, surrounded by the artifacts of my career. The platitudes from the CEO about my valuable contributions felt like ashes in my mouth. The financial collapse was swift and brutal. The house of cards I'd spent 2 decades building just folded in on itself. The severance package was generous, but it was a drop in the ocean of my obligations. The mortgage on the mansion, the leases on the cars, the astronomical fees for the private clubs, and the schools. It was a pyramid scheme of lifestyle, and the foundation had just been pulled out. And the people, my God, the people. The laughter wasn't loud or cruel. It was subtle, a quiet shifting of chairs away from me at a charity gala. The phone calls that went unanswered, the invitations that simply stopped coming. I was a ghost in my own social circle. They didn't see a person who had fallen on hard times. They saw a contaminant of failure, and failure was contagious. Their judgment was a silent, cold thing. It was in the way they'd look past me, their conversations suddenly turning vague. I had become a cautionary tale, and no one wants to stand too close to the warning sign. This new company was founded on a completely different philosophy. Profitability was the primary metric, not user growth, not valuation. Could the business sustain itself? I built it lean. When I finally needed to hire, I hired one person, a meticulous, brilliant engineer who cared more about elegant code than industry headlines. We valued customer feedback above everything else. We talked to every single user. We implemented their suggestions, no matter how small. We focused on making their The unraveling was a physical process, watching the movers pack up a life into cardboard boxes, seeing the artwork I'd chosen for its investment potential, rather than any love of the art itself, wrapped in bubble wrap, and taken away the foreclosure sign on the manicured lawn felt like a public shaming. We moved into a small two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The first night there was the quietest night of my life. There was no hum of the central air system, no distant echo in a vast hallway, just the sound of the refrigerator kicking on the silence was deafening. It was a void where my ego used to be. The despair was a thick, heavy blanket. I felt like I had let everyone down, my wife, my kids, myself. I was paralyzed by shame. I'd walk through the grocery store looking over my shoulder, terrified I'd see someone from my old life. I'd see them looking at my cart, judging the generic brands. I spent days just sitting on the worn couch in the living room staring at the wall, replaying every mistake. I had defined myself by my title, my address, my net worth, and now that those were gone, I felt like I had evaporated. I was a nobody. But then, a strange thing happened. After the dust settled, after the last of the luxury items were sold off, there was a moment. I was sitting at the small formica table in our kitchen nook, drinking a cup of cheap coffee, and I realized there was nothing else to do, no meetings to prep for, no fires to put out, no image to maintain. The phone wasn't ringing. For the first time in 20 years, my time was entirely my own. The fear was still there, but underneath, it was something else, a flicker, the freedom of having nothing left to lose. The weight of constant expectation was gone. I had hit bottom, and the bottom was solid. It was a place to start from. The rediscovery began slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started with time, real, uninterrupted time with my family. I was there for breakfast. I saw the morning routines I had always missed. I helped my son with his homework at the kitchen table. Actually helping him, not just glancing at it between emails. We had conversations that didn't have a 5-minute time limit. I learned things about my own children. I never knew, their fears, their dreams, the little details of their days, that I had always been too busy to hear. The distance that had grown between my wife and me, a chasm filled with my work trips, and her quiet resentment, began to close. We started talking again, not about logistics or bills, but about us. We remembered why we liked each other in the first place. I found joy in things that would have been invisible to me before: the satisfaction of making a meal from scratch, of chopping vegetables and smelling garlic sauté in a pan, the simple pleasure of a walk in the park near our apartment, noticing the change of seasons in a way I never had when I was just rushing from a parked car to a building entrance. I read books, actual books, for no other reason than I wanted to. I'd sit for an hour and just read. The world slowed down. The constant pressure to achieve, to acquire, to be seen, just faded away. It was like a noise I hadn't even known was there had finally been switched off. We were growing at 1,000% a year. Users were signing up in droves. The media loved the story. But in the background, the engineers were frantic. The architecture was straining under the weight of all that success. We had a scaling problem, a fundamental one. I remember the lead architect coming to me, his face pale. He had charts, graphs. He talked about database sharding, about latency, about a critical vulnerability in our payment gateway that needed a complete overhaul. It would have meant slowing lives easier, not on making our numbers look good for a future investor deck. The growth was slow, painfully slow, compared to the rocket ship of my first company. But it was real. It was a steep, steady climb, not an explosive launch. I started tinkering in the small shed behind our apartment building. I had always loved working with my hands as a kid, but it was a hobby I'd abandoned as not being serious or profitable enough. I started fixing things: a neighbor's broken chair, a leaky faucet. Then I started building things: simple bookshelves, a birdhouse. The feeling of creating something tangible, of seeing a project through from a pile of wood to a finished object, gave me a sense of accomplishment my corporate job never could. There was no bonus attached to it, no promotion, just the pure, quiet satisfaction of a job well done. That tinkering turned into a small business, a simple woodworking shop. I make furniture now. It doesn't make me rich, but it pays the bills. More importantly, it feeds my soul. My community changed completely. The people I know now are the people who live around me, the woman who runs the local hardware store who knows my name and what project I am working on, the other parents at the public school who I chat with at pickup. Our connections aren't based on what we can do for each other professionally. They're based on shared experiences, on helping each other out, on genuine friendship. We have barbecues in our modest backyard. We laugh. The laughter is real, not a social Performance, it's a richer, more textured sound. This new life is simpler in every way, slower. We don't have a lot of things, but we have enough, more than enough. The constant background anxiety is gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. When I look back on my old life, I don't see success anymore. I see a prison. I was a slave to a lifestyle I thought I needed. I was chained to a desk, chasing a version of happiness that was sold to me, but never truly existed. The fancy job, the mansion, the status, they were just distractions from the hard, beautiful of building a real life. The real wealth, I've learned, has nothing to do with a bank statement. It's in the depth of your relationships. It's in the time you have to be present for the people you love. It's in the freedom to pursue a passion without worrying about its monetary value. It's in the appreciation for a sunny day, a good meal, a quiet moment. True riches are about who you are when no one is watching, and what you genuinely appreciate. Losing everything was the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the best. It was the universe's brutal, necessary way of stripping away all the noise, so I could finally hear the music. It gave me back my life. The first time we got a paying customer, it wasn't a champagne moment. It was a quiet confirmation, a notification email. $39. It was the most validating $39 I had ever seen. Then came another. And another. We started getting emails from users, not just support tickets, but notes thanking us for how reliable the tool was. That feedback became our fuel. We embraced the struggle. There was a joy in the problem-solving, in the grind of it. I found I was sleeping better. The anxiety that had been my constant companion during the vortex days was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. We were building something solid, brick by brick. We weren't building on sand this time. 5 years later, the new company is successful. It's not a unicorn. It will never be on the cover of a magazine. But it's profitable. It's respected by the people who use it. It employs a small team of incredibly talented people who are all aligned on the same mission to build something great and lasting. The industry respect came quietly. An article in a trade publication mentioning us as a model of sustainable growth. The people who had laughed, the ones who had mocked the failure, they are silent now. Few have even reached out asking for advice on their own scaling issues. There's no satisfaction in that. Not really. The focus is entirely internal. The victory isn't in their silence. It's in our daily stand-up meetings, in the quiet hum of a server handling load effortlessly, in the knowledge that we built this the right way. The perspective is forever changed. I don't value luck or hype anymore. I value resilience. I value the integrity of the code. I value the trust of a customer who knows the product will just work. The spectacle of being a billion-dollar founder feels empty. Now the real success, the one that matters, is the ability to fall apart completely and then piece yourself back together stronger at the broken places. It's about looking at the ruins of your ambition and having the courage to sift through the debris, not to find treasure, but to find the blueprints for a better foundation. True success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning how to rebuild from it with humility, with grit, and above all, with integrity. The silence now isn't the silence of emptiness. It's the quiet, solid sound of something built to last. The feeling of the brush in my hand was the only thing that ever felt completely right. Not just right, it was necessary, like breathing. My first studio was just a corner of my apartment, the floorboards permanently stained with little flecks of cadmium red and phthalo blue. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil was my perfume. It'd work for hours, until the light faded and my back ached. And it never felt like work. It felt like discovery, like I was pulling these images out of the air, giving them. My first exhibition was in a tiny cafe. I was so nervous my hands were shaking. As I hung the paintings, they were big, messy, expressive things. I thought they were full of truth. And people seemed to respond. They'd stand in front of them, they'd nod, they'd ask questions. It felt like a beginning, a real beginning. I started to believe I had a voice, something unique to say in the chaotic chorus of the art world. I landed a show in a proper gallery, a small but respected space. I poured everything into that new body of work. It was more ambitious, more personal. I felt like I was on the edge of something. Down it would have meant missing a quarterly growth target. The board was breathing down my neck, expecting hockey stick graphs, not a pause for repairs. I looked at him, and I said the words that would haunt me. We can't afford to slow down. Patch it well, fix it properly. After the next funding round, I prioritized perception over stability. I chose the spectacle over the substance. The night of the opening, the gallery was packed. It was loud, all clinking glasses and animated conversations. I floated through the crowd, feeling a kind of high I'd never known. People were smiling at me, shaking my hand. And then I saw him, Arthur Miller, the most feared critic in the city. He was standing in front of my centerpiece, a large canvas I'd called Erosion. He had his notebook out. My heart was hammering. This was it. This was the moment I would be seen. He published his review 2 days later. I remember buying the paper, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn the pages. And there it was. The headline was short and brutal, a derivative mess. I had to sit down. I read the words, each one like a physical blow. He didn't just dislike it. He eviscerated it. He called the technique amateurish. He said the themes were juvenile, a poor imitation of artists I admired. He said the work had no soul, no original thought. And the final sentence I can still quote it word for word: "This isn't art, it's decorative trash, and the gallery should be ashamed for wasting the wall space." It wasn't just his opinion, it was a verdict. It felt like a public execution. The gallery owner called, his voice full of pity, to say that several clients had withdrawn their offers. The phone, which had been ringing off the hook, went silent. The people who had been so enthusiastic at the opening now avoided my eyes. If I saw them on the street, the criticism didn't just attack my paintings. It attacked the very core of who I thought I was. If my art was trash, then I was the person who made trash. My confidence didn't just crack, it turned to dust. I went back to the studio a few days later. The paintings, which had felt so alive to me just a week before, now looked exactly like what he said. They were a derivative mess. The colors looked garish, the brushstrokes looked clumsy and stupid. I felt a hot wave of shame looking at them. Who did I think I was? I wasn't an artist, I was a fool. So I stopped. I packed all the brushes into a cardboard box. I wrapped the canvases in old sheets and shoved them into a storage unit. It felt like burying something. I scrubbed the stains off the floorboards in my apartment corner. I got rid of the smells. I got a job, a real job, as an administrative assistant in a quiet beige office. I answered emails, I organized files. I went to meetings where people talked about quarterly reports. It was safe, it was predictable. No one was going to write a review in the newspaper about how poorly I filed an invoice. The years went by. I became competent at my job. I got promotions, I paid my bills. On the surface, my life was fine, stable. But there was always this quiet ache, this persistent hollow feeling right in the center of my chest. It was like a part of me had been surgically removed. And I was constantly aware of the emptiness it left behind. I'd walk past an art supply store, and my breath would catch. I'd go to a museum with a friend, and I'd have to leave early because the beauty of it was physically painful. It felt like watching other people have a conversation in a language I used to speak, but had forgotten. I was a ghost in my own life, watching the world of color and passion from the outside. The collapse wasn't a slow leak, it was a detonation. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in a meeting discussing an acquisition offer. My phone started vibrating. Then my assistant was at the door, her face ashen. A security researcher had found the flaw, the one we'd patched over. He hadn't just found it, he'd demonstrated it, a script that could scrape user data, including financial information from millions of profiles. It was on a tech blog. Then it was on CNN. The headline was "Brutal Unicorns." The secret rebellions were small and pathetic, doodling on napkins, during lunch breaks, sketching with a ballpoint pen on the margins of reports. I'd hide these little drawings, crumple them up, throw them away immediately, ashamed of the impulse. It was a betrayal of my decision to be a sensible, normal person. But the need was like a weed, stubborn, pushing through the cracks in the concrete of my sensible life. The catalyst wasn't dramatic. My father passed away. It was sudden. In the grief, in the overwhelming silence that filled my apartment after the funeral, the hollow feeling in my chest became a chasm. All the sensible things, the emails, the reports, they meant nothing. Life was so fragile, so short. And I realized I had spent a decade living a life that wasn't mine. I had surrendered my voice because one man with a newspaper column had told me it was worthless. The pain of that betrayal to myself was far greater than any pain his criticism had caused. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't quit my job. I just went to a hardware store and bought a piece of plywood. I bought a few tubes of paint, some cheap brushes. I set up a space in a corner of my basement. A place I never went. It wasn't a studio, it was a secret. At first it was agony. My hands were stiff. Every mark I made felt awkward. And I heard Arthur Miller's voice in my head. With every stroke, derivative trash. It was paralyzing. But I made a rule: I was not allowed to show this work to anyone ever. There was no audience, no critic, there was only me. And the surface slowly something shifted, the pressure vanished. Without the need to be good, without the fear of being judged. I started to play. I mixed colors I would have never used before. I made messes. I scraped paint off. I started again. The joy didn't come back. As a bang, it was a slow, warm drip. I remembered why it started in the first place. It was the feeling of getting lost. The process, the meditation of it, the pure act of making something from nothing. The work that emerged was different. It wasn't trying to be like anyone else. It was raw and quiet, and strangely powerful. It was about silence and time, and the layers of things that get buried. I started using found objects, pieces of wood, scraps of metal, incorporating them into the paint. It felt honest. It felt like me. The me I was now, scarred and quieter, but finally truthful. After about a year, I got brave enough to show one piece to my oldest friend Sarah. I swore her to secrecy. She came down to the basement, and she just stood there in front of a piece I'd called quietus for a long time. She didn't say anything then. She cried. She said it was the most honest thing I'd ever made. That was the beginning of my community. Just a few people I trusted implicitly. They'd come to the basement not to critique, but to see their silence. Their thoughtful silence was more validating than any glowing review. One of those friends knew a woman who ran a very small, very avant-garde gallery. She pestered me for months to let her bring the owner by. I refused, terrified. But the work in the basement had grown into a full series. It felt complete finally. I agreed. The owner, a woman named Alara, with sharp, intelligent eyes, came down one evening. She walked around the space, looking at each piece for a long time. She didn't say a word for nearly half an hour. The anxiety was unbearable. Broken horn, security failures at Vortex. The phones started ringing. Not congratulations. Panic emails from investors were terse, demanding explanations. We didn't have our stock, which was still private, but eagerly anticipated, became toxic. The board convened an emergency session. By Friday, the funding was pulled. The acquisition vaporized. The company was bled dry in a week. The lawyers took over. The only thing left to do was shut it down. I stood in the office, now silent and empty, the confetti from. Then she turned to me and said, "This is exceptional. I want to show it, all of it." The show was called Recovered Silence. It was a small affair, but the right people came. The response was different this time. It was quieter, more reverent. A blogger wrote a beautiful piece about it. Then an online art magazine picked it up. The story of my disappearance and secret return became part of the narrative. The work started to resonate. It went viral in a quiet, art world way. The auction was the real shock. Alara had convinced me to let her put one of the larger pieces, palimpsest, into a major contemporary art auction. I didn't expect much. I watched the livestream on my computer at home, my heart in my throat. The bidding started slowly. Then 2 phones lit up. It went back and forth, the numbers climbing in increments. I couldn't comprehend. When the hammer fell, the final price with the buyer's premium was just over $1 million. Silence in my apartment after was deafening. $1 million for a painting I made in my basement for myself. The same paintings that were called trash. The phone started ringing. Reporters, galleries from other cities. And then an email popped into my inbox. The subject line was a long overdue apology. It was from Arthur Miller. He'd seen the coverage. He wrote a long, florid email about how my new work had redeemed my early promise, and how he now saw glimmers of genius he had missed before. He wanted to interview me for a feature. I read it twice. I felt nothing, no anger, no vindication, just a profound indifference. His opinion, good or bad, had no power over me anymore. I deleted the email. That was the real moment of victory. It wasn't the money was just a number. It was the realization that I had built my artistic self on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by anyone else. The value of the work wasn't determined by a critic or a price tag. It was determined by the courage it took to make it, by the honesty of the process. The $1 million was just the world catching up to a truth I had already discovered in the quiet of my basement, the truth that art never was about them. It was always about the quiet, stubborn need to speak, even when you think no one is listening, especially then. The world used to be a place of color and sound. I remember that, the sharp, clean smell of morning air, the feeling of my heart pounding in my chest after a run, a good healthy burn in my muscles, the simple joy of eating a meal without having to think about what it might do to me. That feels like a lifetime ago. It started subtly, as these things often do. A fatigue that a good night's sleep couldn't fix, a dull ache in my joints that I blamed on getting older. Then came the brain fog, this thick, woolly feeling in my head. That made it hard to concentrate hard to even form a complete sentence. Sometimes it'd be in the middle of a conversation and just lose the thread entirely. The colors of the world began to dim, as if someone was slowly turning down a dial on my senses. I did what you're supposed to do. I went to the doctor. My primary care physician was sympathetic at first. We ran blood tests. The results came back inconclusive, a little low in iron, maybe nothing to explain the crushing fatigue, the digestive issues that had started, the feeling that my body was betraying me. He prescribed some supplements, told me to get more rest. I tried. But rest didn't help, the symptoms just multiplied. I developed a sensitivity to light and sound, ordinary noises like the launch party still stuck under a desk leg, a $1 billion valuation turned to dust in my hands. Hum of the refrigerator or the clatter of dishes felt like physical assaults. My skin would break out in rashes for no reason. I was a puzzle, and none of the pieces seemed to fit. So began the medical maze. I became a professional patient. I saw a gastroenterologist for the stomach pain, an endocrinologist for the fatigue, a rheumatologist for the joint aches. Each specialist looked at me through the narrow lens of their own field. Described the whole constellation of symptoms. But they'd only treat the one that fell under their jurisdiction. I was prescribed acid blockers, anti-inflammatories, even mild antidepressants, for the stress they assumed was causing it. All the medications created new side effects, layering new problems on top of the old ones. I was a chemical experiment, and I was failing. My health declined in a slow, steady slope. I had to cut back my hours at work. I stopped seeing friends, the invitations dried up. People don't know what to do with someone who is chronically ill. They offer platitudes at first, then they just drift away. The worst was the silence from my family. My own sister told me I just needed a positive attitude. She said maybe, if you stopped focusing on it so much, you'd feel better. It's a special kind of loneliness to be sick and have the people closest to you imply that it's your own fault. The tipping point was the appointment with the renowned specialist, the one my insurance took months to approve. He had a reputation for solving complex cases. I walked into his office with a binder full of my symptoms, my test results, a timeline of my decline. I had hope for the first time in a year. He spent 10 minutes with me. He skimmed the file, asked a few perfunctory questions, and then he did a physical exam that felt rushed, dismissive. He sat back down at his desk, took off his glasses, and looked at me with a kind of practiced pity. He said the tests from his department were all within normal limits. He said my case didn't present with the classic markers for any known autoimmune or neurological condition. And then he said the words that crushed what was left of my spirit. He said, sometimes the body expresses what the mind cannot. I think you should consider that this might be a somatic manifestation, a psychosomatic illness. He suggested I see a psychiatrist. He wasn't mean about it. He was calm, clinical, and utterly final in his eyes. I was a hopeless case, a ghost in the machine. He was washing his hands of me. The car ride home was a blur. I remember sitting in my living room, the silence pressing in on me. Hopeless case. That's what I was, a medical dead end. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. I was pale, thin shadows under my eyes. I spent the next week mostly in bed. The despair was a physical weight pinning me to the mattress. But something shifted in me during those dark days. A tiny, stubborn ember of anger began to glow. It was a quiet, ferocious thing. This is it. This is the end of the road, because one man with all his credentials decided my suffering wasn't real. I refused to accept that, lying there too weak to get up. I had a moment of terrifying clarity. The established system had given up on me. If I was going to get better, I would have to do it myself. No one was coming to save me. The responsibility landed on my shoulders with a weight I could actually bear. It was the weight of action, not the weight of helplessness. That was the moment I stopped being a patient and became a researcher, a detective on the trail of my own body. I devoured everything. I read medical journals on PubMed until my eyes burned. I learned about the gut-brain axis, about mitochondrial function, about chronic inflammation. I spent hours in online forums, not for pity, but for data. I connected with people from all over the world who had similar constellations of symptoms. We were a community of ghosts, sharing clues. I learned about things. And then came the laughter. It was on Twitter, in the comment sections of tech newsletters. My former rivals, the ones I'd beaten to funding, were posting cryptic messages about building on sand. One of them, a guy I'd once dismissed in a pitch meeting, wrote a long LinkedIn post about the importance of technical integrity over hype. it wasn't just criticism. It was mockery. They were dancing on the grave of my ambition colleagues I'd considered friends. Stopped taking my calls my name, which weeks before had been. My doctors had never mentioned mast cell activation syndrome, mold toxicity, the role of diet and environmental triggers. It was like learning a new language. I started to see patterns. My symptoms weren't a random collection, they were a roadmap. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build my own protocol. It was a mosaic pieced together from scientific studies, patient anecdotes, and a growing intuition about my own body. It was radical. I eliminated everything. I started with a strict elimination diet, cutting out gluten, dairy, sugar, all processed foods. For the first week, I felt worse. The detox headaches were brutal. But then the brain fog lifted just a little. It was like a window had been cracked open in a stuffy room. That was the first signal, the first tangible proof that I could influence my own state. I introduced supplements based on my research: high-dose magnesium, methylated B vitamins, probiotics. I started gentle restorative exercises like yoga and walking, listening to my body's limits. Instead of pushing through them, I began a meditation practice to address the nervous system dysregulation that I now understood was a huge part of my illness. It wasn't a quick fix, it was a complete overhaul of my life. The climb back was grueling. It was a daily discipline that required a level of commitment I didn't know I possessed. My kitchen became a laboratory. Every meal was prepared from scratch. I spent my weekends meal prepping, my evenings doing gentle stretches. There were setbacks, days where I would wake up and feel like I'd been thrown back to the beginning. The old symptoms would flare up, and the voice of doubt would whisper that the specialist was right, that this was all a fantasy. The mental battle was as hard as the physical. When I had to constantly fight the impulse to give up to make it harder, I started a blog. I decided to document everything: the good days, the bad days, the experiments, the results. I did it for accountability, so I couldn't quietly quit. But something beautiful happened. People started reading it. They commented, they shared their own stories. I wasn't alone in my room anymore. I was part of a movement of people taking their health into their own hands. That community became a source of strength I couldn't have anticipated. The milestones started to accumulate, small victories that felt like miracles. The first day I woke up without pain. The first time I was able to walk around the block without needing to lie down afterwards. The first social event I attended where I could actually engage in the conversation instead of just pretending. While I counted the minutes until I could leave, I remember the first bite of food I ate that tasted truly delicious again. It was a simple piece of roasted sweet potato. I cried. I was reclaiming sensations I thought I'd lost forever. It took months, over a year of this relentless consistency. But the slope was finally pointing upward. The gray filter over the world began to lift. Colors looked bright again. Sounds became rich, not painful. The energy returned, not in a frantic burst, but as a deep, steady current. The final confirmation came during a follow-up appointment with my original primary care physician. I hadn't seen him in over a year. I walked into his office, and I saw the shock on his face. I wasn't the pale, frail person he remembered. I had color in my cheeks. I had gained healthy weight. I handed him a printout of my journey: diet, the supplements, the lifestyle changes. He read it with a growing look of astonishment. He said, "I have to be honest. When you left here last time, I was very concerned. I didn't think we'd see this kind of turnaround. This is remarkable." He asked me thoughtful questions. He was genuinely curious. The dismissive specialist I heard through the grapevine that his nurse practitioner had asked for a copy of my blog to share with other patients who felt stuck. The system that had labeled me hopeless was now seeking to learn from me. Synonymous with success was now a punchline. I'd become a cautionary tale, the poster child for irresponsible growth. I'm not just well now, I'm healthier than I was before I got sick, because now I understand my body as an ecosystem. I know what nourishes it and what harms it. The illness was a brutal teacher, but it taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. My new purpose is clear. I work as a health coach, now guiding others who feel abandoned by conventional medicine. I don't offer magic bullets. I offer a framework. I teach them how to become detectives of their own health. I show them that they are not hopeless cases. They are the only true experts on their own bodies. The final message, the one I carry with me every day, is this: no one, no degree, no title, has the right to tell you that your hope is lost. Hope is a seed that grows from within. It requires the courage to stop looking for a savior and to become one for yourself. The power was always there. I just had to be desperate enough and angry enough and brave enough to finally reach for it. You always think you know someone, especially when you share a last name. We weren't just family, we were a unit. Or so I believed. My older brother David. He was the executor of our father's estate, the responsible one, the one with the head for numbers. I was the creative one, the one who needed looking after, or so they said. I trusted him implicitly. It's a special kind of foolishness, isn't it, to hand over the keys to your future, because of shared childhood memories. The will was straightforward. Dad built that hardware supply business from nothing. It was his life. He left it to both of us 50-50. David was to manage it, and I would receive my share of the profits for the first couple of years. It seemed to work. The checks came regularly. Then they started getting smaller. David would sigh over the phone, talk about market downturns, increased operational costs. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. The discovery was an accident. I was cleaning out my attic looking for some old photos of Dad, and I found a box of his personal papers. It'd never really gone through. Beneath a stack of old letters, I found a copy of the corporate bylaws. I'd never seen them before. I started reading, and the language was dense legal. But one clause was clear as day. It outlined a procedure for share dilution. A majority shareholder could vote to issue new shares, effectively watering down the ownership of the minority. My stomach sank. I kept reading, and then I found it. The meeting minutes. A vote I never knew about. David had issued millions of new shares to himself. My 50% had been diluted to less than 2. He hadn't just been skimming profits. He had stolen the company itself. He had systematically, legally stolen my inheritance. I drove to his office, the papers shaking in my hand. I didn't even call first. I walked right past his assistant, into his big corner office. With the view he loved so much, he was on the phone laughing. He finished his call, smiled at me, that patronizing older brother smile. What's up, kiddo? You look upset. I laid the papers on his desk. I didn't say anything. I just pointed to the clause, to the minutes with his signature. His smile didn't even falter. He leaned back in his leather chair. Oh, that was a necessary corporate restructuring to protect the company's future. You wouldn't understand the complexities. I told him. He stole from me. I said the word stole, and that's when he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a cold, dismissive laugh. Don't be so dramatic. I've been carrying you for years. You think you could have managed this? Dad knew you couldn't handle it. He knew I was the only one who could keep this family afloat. He stood up, walked around the desk. Be smart, walk away. Y'all get a nice little stipend every month if you just sign this new agreement. Fight me, and y'all get nothing. You can't win. You don't have the resources or the guts. I was cast out. He froze the accounts I had access to. The monthly checks stopped. The credit card he'd given me for family expenses was declined at the grocery store. I had a mortgage. I had bills. The profound hurt wasn't just financial. It was the absolute demolition of a lifetime of trust. The person who taught me to ride a bike had just pushed me off a cliff. The silence after the storm was worse than the noise of the collapse. I was alone in my apartment, which felt cavernous and empty. The lease was up soon, and I couldn't afford it. The shame was a physical weight. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, reliving that moment. I dismissed the engineer. The depression wasn't dramatic. It was a gray fog that settled over everything. Getting out of bed became a monumental task. My identity had been so tightly wound around being the founder that without that night, sitting on the floor of my living room surrounded by bills and final notices, something in me broke. But it didn't break into pieces. It broke open. The grief and the white-hot anger didn't consume me. They fused together into something new, something cold and hard and determined. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. I made a vow right there, not a shouted promise, but a quiet internal oath. I would take it all back, every share, every dollar, and I would build something of my own. Something he could never touch. The next morning, I started with a lawyer, a ruthless, expensive litigator, who specialized in corporate fraud. Her name was Eleanor Vance. Her office was stark modern, and her eyes missed nothing. She laid it out for me, no sugarcoating. This will be a war of attrition. She said, he has deep pockets. He will delay, he will obfuscate, he will try to bury you in legal fees. Until you give up, it will take years. And it will cost you everything you have left to fight it. I told her I had nothing left to lose. I accepted it. This was the reality. I had to survive. My career in graphic design wasn't going to cover the legal bills and my life. So I took a job, a low-status, humbling job, stocking shelves overnight at a big-box store. While the world slept, I stacked boxes. And in the quiet hours, with my hands busy, my mind was working. I started sketching out a business plan on my phone during breaks. I saw a gap in the market, a niche my father's old company ignored sustainable, high-quality building materials for a new generation of homeowners. Called it foundation, the irony wasn't lost on me. The emotional cost was the hardest part. Every legal motion David filed was a fresh betrayal. Every holiday that passed in silence was a wound. Fighting a war against someone you once loved is a unique kind of loneliness. You can't really explain it to friends. They just see the anger, not the deep, aching loss underneath it. I had to become two people: the one who fought the legal battle, who built the business plan, who was fierce and unyielding, and the one who late at night still remembered what it felt like to have a brother. The battle was fought on two fronts: the courtroom and the ledger. Arena was a pit bull. We got a small early victory. A judge denied David's motion to dismiss the case. It was a tiny thing, but it was the first crack in his armor. Meanwhile, I quit the stocking job. I took every last bit of my savings, my 401k, everything, and I launched Foundation as an online marketplace. The first month I made 3 sales to friends, the second month 10. Then a small design firm found me. Then contractor. It was slow, painstaking work, but every sale was a brick in the wall I was building around my new life.